Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast for the 18th of February 2024. Richard Saunders coming to you once again from beautiful downtown Oakland. Well, it's a bit grim today. It's cloudy and raining. I think it was raining all night. It's a bit cool and crisp, but some of us prefer this sort of weather to hot and humid. I hope the weather is to your liking no matter where you are listening around the world. Coming up on this week's show, the UFOs keep attacking. Oh yeah, or is it their agents on Earth? The people who are being directed by alien intelligences far superior to those of mortal men. The UFO truthers are in full flight. No, that's not right. Maybe they are. In full force, in full fury, in fullness, attacking skeptics at the moment. Mainly because UFOs keep really not appearing, and that must irk the UFO believers a little bit. You know, they're led to believe that UFOs are here. They've been here for years. Why isn't the information available and obvious? It must be because of those naughty skeptics. We find out about more attacks against Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia, and Brian Dunning for his movie, the UFO movie they don't want you to see. And you can't make this up. As we'll get to in the segment, one reviewer of Brian's movie has told people not to see the movie. Following that, it's the Australian Skeptics Newsletter by Tim Mendham, read once again from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada by Adrienne Hill. What has caught Tim's skeptical eye this week? Then we have an interview I recorded live at the Berkeley Public Library here in Oakland, Berkeley area, just up the road. Last weekend we had a hangout. I gave a course, a lesson, a lecture, a talk about how to make a podcast. And during the flow of that talk, I interviewed Dr. Eugenie Scott about teeth, the importance of teeth and other things. That was a lot of fun. We did the interview on the spot, and I began to do the edit of the interview for the audience at the time to show them how music and interviews all work together. Then to round off the show, it's back to the Trove archives where we continue looking at psychics and mediums in Australian printed history. And the years ranging this week go from 1979 to 1994. Head to the Skeptic Zone page, the main page at skepticzone.tv for this week's show notes, including links, and a link to the Surf Coast Skepticamp in beautiful Aireys Inlet, Victoria, where next weekend I will be appearing on the big screen together with Brian Dunning. More information, just follow the link on that page. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have a nice bagel with Vegemite. Yes, I brought my own little supply of Vegemite. And those little packets you can get, the catering size packets. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Now, a couple of weeks ago we were mentioning how the UFO Brigade are not best pleased with the likes of Brian Dunning for his movie, the UFO movie they don't want you to see, and Susan Gerbic for her continuing efforts to update Wikipedia with citations playing within the rules, as you will know by listening to recent interviews with Susan. It's a fascinating phenomenon we're seeing at the moment, where more and more of the UFO believers are getting motivated, shall we say, and annoyed and aggravated. I draw your attention to a recent posting by Brian Dunning, where he's talking about the reviews his movie's been receiving on the Internet Movie Database. He says the UFO movie is getting review bombed on IMDb by angry alien truthers, giving it a 1 out of 10 rating. If you believe it is better than 1 out of 10, consider giving it a review of your own. And you can easily do that if you're registered at the Internet Movie Database by going to the UFO movie they don't want you to see and including your own review and rating. But I would urge you sincerely not to do it unless you've seen the movie, and if you have, give it your honest review and rating. Because what appears to be happening are, as Brian Dunning puts it, the UFO truthers are simply bombing the ratings with 1-star reviews. Maybe they've seen the movie, not necessarily so. And we discover the more recent reviews are more in line with what we consider the movie to be. Even if you don't agree with the conclusions, it's actually a fine documentary. So the people giving it very low scores, I suspect, have not seen it, or they've certainly got an agenda. A balanced review, for example, if I scroll down the list of reviews, is a 5 out of 10. Sobering skepticism mixed with a lot of assumptions. Okay, at least the person would have taken the time to see the movie. Another one, a typical 1 out of 10 review, says ignored facts and a lot of speculations. Debunker hit job. Well, if you've seen the movie, it's certainly not a debunker hit job. The UFO truthers love to paint skeptics as these tired old people who won't believe no matter what, or, as appears to be the case, many of them are convinced that the skeptical community is in league with the one world government, the US government, the forces of evil, the people who are trying to cover things up. And in many times we will see the skeptical movement and people within it being accused of being government shills on the government payroll. I mean, we've heard this for many years. A 2 out of 10 reviews here says it's a rather obvious hit piece. I think, sadly, I've reported before how some people are attacking the movie purely based on the appearance of some of those in the movie. But I think the winner of the piece of alien cake, the people who take the cake, first prize, goes to a review by somebody called Droid 45963, and the review is a 1-star out of 10, and it says, "Don't watch this movie." So at last we know who they are in the UFO movie they don't want you to see. Well, they are apparently Droid 45963. And the first line says, the title of this movie is a watch bait. Don't watch it because the author doesn't believe that UFOs are real. And a moment's thought will let you know that that sentence is nonsensical. Of course, unidentified flying objects are real. I've seen many myself. But what they mean, of course, is aliens zipping around in their spaceships, or creatures from other dimensions, or something like that. But again, I encourage you, if you have seen the movie, to go to the Internet Movie Database and give it your honest review and honest score. Don't just think because you happen to agree, probably, with the conclusions or with what the movie is trying to say, that you must give it a high score. You give it your honest review and your honest score. Now, this brings me to Susan Gerbic, who is also under a lot of scrutiny by the UFO truthers. And in fact, believe it or not, there has been on change.org a petition created to do something about her. And you can't make this stuff up. demand Wikipedia to dismiss editors suppressing UAP phenomenon information. So again, it's clear that a lot of these people sincerely, I would hope sincerely, well, it's a bit sad to say, believe that people like Susan Gerbic and the people at Guerrilla Skepticism, or Brian Dunning, or even myself, are actively suppressing information about aliens zapping around the planet or something like that, or psychic phenomena or what have you. It says, we call upon wikipedia.org to take immediate action against content editors who have knowingly distorted or eradicated information related to the unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, phenomenon, and its associated individuals. These editors, known as the, quote, guerrilla skeptics, end quote, are perpetuating a discredited Cold War policy of denial and ridicule, which is fundamentally at odds with Wikipedia's mission of providing free access to the sum of all human knowledge. The implicated editors include, and they list a string of editors' handles, their actions not only undermine the credibility of this globally recognized platform, but also suppress truth-seeking efforts in an area gaining increasing attention from scientists and governments alike. It's the old any day now argument. Any day now the world will come around to our point of view. And if they're not, then there must be evil people suppressing it. A report in the New York Times in 2020 about US government's interests in UAPs shows that such phenomena deserve serious examination rather than dismissal or distortion. We urge Wikipedia.org to uphold its commitment towards unbiased dissemination of knowledge by removing these editors immediately. Sign this petition today for transparency and truthfulness on one of the world's most visited information platforms. So there you go. And of course, another character under the firing line of the UFO truthers out there, well, I don't know how many, the hardcore, is Mick West for his brilliant examination of the recent UFO, UAP movies by various people in the US military, which he has examined and has come to very logical, straightforward, common sense conclusions. And no, they don't have to be exotic spacecraft whizzing around. They can be quite mundane. And, for example, somebody called standforbetter.org is saying to Mick West, 1. Are you affiliated with the guerrilla skeptics at all? 2. Do you communicate with whoever is Lucky Louie or Susan Gerbic? 3. Do you support their tactics? 4. Do you write content for anyone who is posting as Lucky Louie? And Mick West replies, I have answered all these questions several times. If you want to chat about it in more detail, then you can always invite me on your show. And later on, Susan Gerbic adds, I have also offered to go on his show, no response. So the UFO truthers and various people in the fringe of society can, not always of course, but can get so wrapped up in conspiracies and intrigue. It sort of reminds me of the pareidolia effect, where you see randomness, but you put your own interpretation onto it. So where we see people like Mick West and Susan Gerbic playing by the rules, analyzing things, and being quite open about it, the truthers and the believers will see plot, intrigue, conspiracy, and evil intentions. Now, Susan Gerbic has written an interesting piece examining all of this. The title is I Blame the Australian Skeptics, because of the connections to Ross Coulthard, who won our Bench Spoon Award. But it's an interesting piece, and I will link to it in this week's show notes, and I encourage you to read that. So, skeptics under attack by UFOs again. The UFO hardcore, the truthers, The people who really have made up their minds that there are aliens or interdimensional creatures visiting Earth. But the fact that after decades and decades and decades, the evidence is still not forthcoming, and it's not likely to be forthcoming, does not sit well with them. It jars, it irks, it collides with what they know is the truth, and that these creatures or these machines are here. Therefore, they will look for reasons as to why this hasn't been publicly made available. The skeptics are in their firing line. I guess they're an easy target. It's like the psychic who knows that they can use their psychic powers in whatever way, and when tested by the skeptics fail, they will often blame the skeptics for their failure because they know deep down that their powers are real, and so when the powers don't work, they look for someone to blame. Again, I will link to Susan Gerbic's article in this week's show notes.
Hello, this is Adrienne Hill from Skepticamp Studios in Calgary, Canada, to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 191. But don't forget, you can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories mentioned. Just go to skeptics.com.au to sign up. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. It just seems like yesterday that we were in Melbourne, enjoying ourselves at the Skeptics Convention. Actually, it really wasn't that long ago, a bit over 2 months, which is like yesterday. But we'll be back in November for round 40, so it's all gung-ho from now on. Meanwhile, to get your ongoing skeptical hit, you can visit Skepticamp if you're on the Great Ocean Road in a week or so. Or visit a Skeptics in the Pub across most Australian capitals most months. Read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. Skepticon 2024, Sydney, November 23rd through 24th. We're happy to announce that this year's Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention, or Skepticon 2024, will be held at the Guthrie Theatre in the University of Technology, Sydney, from November 23rd through 24th. This is our 40th consecutive convention. We haven't missed a year since 1985, which we feel is quite an achievement. We'll announce the lineup as soon as we can, and in-person and online tickets should be on sale around July. Make sure you stick those dates into your diary. Skepticamp, February 24th, Aries Inlet. Surf Coast Skepticamp 9 will be held on Saturday, February 24th, 2024, at the Aries Inlet Community Centre in Victoria, about 125 kilometres from the Melbourne CBD or 50 kilometres past Geelong. Richard corrected me on that one in the last newsletter. I really try my best, but I'm not very good at pronouncing things. The program will be headlined by 2 Skeptics of the Year, the newly crowned Paul Gallagher and past winner Mal Vickers. Paul will discuss post-COVID anti-vaxxers, and Mal will look at Australia's alt-med industry. Is it out of control? They will be joined online by a special presentation live from Oregon by Richard Saunders and Brian Dunning. Skepticamps are about involvement and contribution, involving 20-minute presentations volunteered by enthusiastic speakers on something that would interest a skeptical audience. So put your thinking caps on and add your name to the list. And it's free. Bookings for the Surf Coast Skepticamp 2024 can be made through Eventbrite. The menace of wellness influencers. This is a great article by Stephen Novella on the overlap between wellness gurus, snake oil merchants, con artists, and conspiracy theorists. As in, quote, there is this wonderful cure, but why aren't we seeing it? End quote. Mercola, Alex Jones, and Crunchy Mama are all discussed in the article. Unraveling the Enfield Haunting. This 16-minute video looks at the famous UK haunting, the one with the bouncing girl. Most interviewees are believers, but input from Deborah Hyde of UK Skeptics adds some much-needed alternative views. You'd be interested to know, acupuncture still doesn't work. This is a long article that begins with a swipe at a Washington Post column extolling the science and effectiveness of acupuncture. It then goes on to give a decent background on the treatment and how to approach scientific studies. This is well worth a read, but watch out for those annoying, interloping ads. What the hell happened to the chupacabra? This is a serious look by noted skeptic Ben Radford on the historical development of that doggy, coyote, alien-y, wolfman type thingy. And this is on the AIPT pop culture site, which has good articles in its Skepticism Month section. And I've read most of the articles this month, and they have been excellent. And I too hope to have an article published if my writing is up to snuff. The history of ectoplasm. This is a good look at the gooey stuff that used to exude from spiritualists' noses and other orifices, like some sort of chewing gum snot. Ooh. Its role has diminished over the years thanks to a lot of ectoplasmic manifestations having been proved to be hoaxes. Ooh, surprise, surprise. And it's gone out of fashion in modern paranormal research. This is a historically interesting and fairly short piece on Higgy Pop, another pop culture paranormal-oriented site. We are working on the March 2024 issue of The Skeptic, but in the meantime, the December 2023 issue is out and about. It looks at some famous or infamous UFO and haunting claims, including an in-depth look at the recent "I've not seen dead alien bodies, but I know they're there" kerfuffle. Plus, a lot more. New subscriptions start with the next issue, but you can also order a copy of the most recent one as a treat. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both, since the digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. You can email him at editor@skeptics.com.au. Items of interest. Coromandel's Bigfoot sought by filmmaker. Filmmaker and paranormal investigator Mark Koppel is looking for Bigfoot's Kiwi cousin, Moihau Man, in the surroundings of the sacred Mount Moihau at the tip of the Coromandel Peninsula. Despite his background as an abattoir at Skinwalker Ranch in the U.S., home to more paranormalities than you can imagine, literally, he says he had no interest in the Moihau Man until he experienced, quote, strangeness in the wilds of New Zealand, end quote. Ah, science. Can dogs see ghosts? The response to the question in the headline is not straightforward. The article goes on to say, quote, that is so because, simply put, there is no definitive scientific proof to suggest that ghosts exist, end quote. And it's downhill from there, covering canine senses, doggy intuition, and one we have to admit we like, ESP, or extra smell perception. Kinda sounds like they're barking up the wrong tree. Most haunted hotels around the world. There's about 20 of them, the usual suspects, plus a couple in Australia we didn't realize had alternative spirits. That's the Russell Hotel in the Rocks, Sydney. Sorry, it's closed for renovations. And the North Kapunda Hotel in North Kapunda, north of Adelaide. We're seeing a thread here. In South, thread broken, Australia. They look like ordinary pubs to us, which shows we don't know our poltergeist from our port. Non-story of the week. Psychic doesn't find missing woman. The heading is, quote, psychic reading points family of missing Macon woman to building, body not found, end quote. An unnamed psychic sends a family of a missing woman to 2 different buildings claiming that's where she would be found. Result? Zilch. And they get hauled up for trespassing. How depressing, how frustrating, how gullible to do it twice. Silliest story of the week. Psychic spy sees ancient aliens on Mars. Someone who claims he worked for the CIA's experiments into psychic powers says he saw 10-foot-tall aliens in a pyramid on Mars 1 million years ago. And an update. For the record, the 10-foot aliens we cited last newsletter have nothing to do with the million-years-old Martian version. These were aliens seen, badly, very grain-fuzzy pics, walking outside a Miami suburban mall. They turn out to be 3 people walking side by side. The Computer Forensic Activities of Visual Effects Group, VFX Artists, reveal all about this and other video evidence of UFOs and such. Their slightly hysterical enjoyment aside, this group makes some wonderful videos debunking other videos. It's well worth a deep dive. Other silliest story of the week. Psychic crab predicts Super Bowl winner. Oh, and why do we even bother? Well, that's all for today. Now it's time to go upstairs to watch a replay of the Calgary Flames NHL hockey team being taken to task by the Skookum Edmonton Oilers. Sometimes it can be more interesting to watch the Zamboni clean the ice between periods, but these rivals usually put on a great performance. Yes, the Canadian word of the week is back. However, most of North America will be familiar with the term Zamboni. What most may not know, and I certainly didn't, was the ice cleaning and resurfacing machine was invented in 1949 in Paramount, California, in a place where snow rarely falls. It was invented by American inventor Frank Zamboni. The Zamboni has been used many times in popular culture, including Snoopy riding one in the Peanuts cartoons, James Bond using a Zamboni as a weapon, and Harry and Lloyd in the movie Dumb and Dumber stealing a Zamboni and driving it on a highway. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill.
G'day, Dr. Carl here, popping up on your beloved Richard Saunders podcast, inviting you to follow me on TikTok where things are much faster. And it all has to happen in a minute or less. So, why do diet drinks get you drunker? For example, a rum and diet cola versus a rum and regular cola. Why do we hear the ocean in a seashell? Is coffee good or bad for you? With regard to farts, what happens when you hold them in, and why do farts smell worse in the shower? And the old wooden spoon, as used in cooking, does have a very porous surface, so in terms of bacteria, is it safe to use? And of course, we all know that destiny shapes our ends, but so do the natural electrical fields that we generate, and marijuana munchies might be related to a 500-million-year-old mutation that makes eating enjoyable via our natural cannabinoids that our body makes. Just follow me on TikTok at Dr. Carl, DRKARL, to find out the answer to all these questions and more.
So I'm very pleased, ladies and gentlemen, to be here in the Berkeley Public Library at the Bay Area
and this is my radio voice, Bay Area Skeptics Hangout, and joining me live on the stage here is special guest Dr. Eugenie Scott. A big hand for Eugenie Scott, everybody. Hello, Jeannie. Here we are at the Bay Area Hangout. How long have these been going?
Well, I think we had our first one last spring. It's an effort to try to get people together again. You know, after COVID and we started doing everything streaming, we kind of got out of the habit of meeting in person. And people like to see one another. People like the social aspects of skepticism. So we're experimenting with these hangouts, and sometimes when a skeptic comes in from afar, like you, we'll try to set up a hangout. It's not every month. We've missed a few, but episodically we're trying to get the gang together again.
It's really nice. I think it's great to have a social gathering after all those years of not being able to.
Indeed. I think there's a real hunger for seeing one another in person. Pheromones or something like that.
I think you might be right. Now, I had dinner with you last night, which was a joy, and you were discussing something which I found fascinating, and I think the audience here tonight this afternoon will as well. You were talking about your research into teeth. Teeth, right? The development of human teeth and jaws. And you made a fascinating point that depending on the diet of the particular, what do you call it, society, group?
Population,
it really dictates how our jaws evolve and change and the size of our teeth. What can you tell us about that? I thought that was fascinating.
You must be one of about 4 people on the planet who does. I mean, we had dinner with a skeptic friend of ours, and it was a lovely time. And the husband accidentally asked me, "So what did you do your dissertation on?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact." And I proceeded to tell them, which, much to their dismay, I'm sure. Basically, what I was doing back in the 70s, when I was collecting my data in Peru, is looking at archaeologically excavated populations. And I was interested in testing a hypothesis about natural selection on dentition. And of course, natural selection operates over many, many generations. It's not something that just happens in one pass. And so when you get an environmental change, then it is reasonable to look for some sort of natural selection pressure on the population. And one of the things that you find documented exceptionally well in Peru is the change from hunting and gathering to food production. And the samples that I was working with in the museum there were particularly valuable because they had actually all been archaeologically excavated and they had all been dated with carbon-14, which is not the case with an awful lot of skeletal populations, believe me. To cut to the chase, it didn't work. I measured a whole lot of teeth and did some not terribly sophisticated analyses, some principal components and some factor analyses to try to get an idea of the change in size and the change in shape over time. Some stuff with craniofacial change as well. But according to this hypothesis about dental change with selection, once you get into food production, then you relax the selection on the teeth for large teeth. Because one of the things that you find with hunter-gatherer populations is they use their teeth a lot. They're eating a lot of tough food. One of the very earliest groups that I dealt with in Peru, were dealing with, their subsistence was shellfish and marine resources. So they were getting a ton of grit in their food. And basically their teeth were just getting ground off. If they didn't have selection for larger teeth, those people would have been toast in, a couple dozen generations. At any rate, the idea being is that when you move to food production, corn, bean, squash, the trinity of the New World native populations, you also invent things like pottery, and so your food the food that you eat is softer, and you have ways of preparing it that also decrease the stress of requiring very large teeth and muscles and so forth. Unfortunately, with the samples that I had, I was not able to show that, partly because my earliest populations, their teeth were just ground down, unfortunately. I mean, I obviously tried to use those teeth that had some enamel on them, clearly. But as we got into the later Inca food cultivators, there was no appreciable change. But that's what science is all about, right? You don't always get a positive result with your hypotheses. But one of the things that I found, and anybody else working with dental anthropology back in the day and today, is that you get real changes in things like dental caries, things like alveolar bone resorption, things like abscesses, as a result of dietary change. And it's very predictable. You increase the sugars and starches, you increase the enthusiasm of bacteria in the teeth, and you increase the number of caries. So once you get food production, you start seeing a whole lot more cavities and a lot less secondary dentin because, of course, you're not grinding those teeth down.
So you get a whole lot more teeth.
Yeah, more teeth? No, you're stuck with the same number of teeth. You're not going to get any more.
Well, more of the teeth, more of the same teeth.
Yes, exactly. More tooth.
More tooth.
More teeth is misleading because that could imply that we, instead of having, 36, we have more. But anyway. So yes, I can bore people for long periods of time talking about dental anthropology. But actually, teeth are a pretty interesting part of the body for getting ideas about adaptation, about natural selection, about what people were doing. And of course, nowadays, since I left that area of anthropology, they're doing a tremendous amount more in microanalysis of various kinds, of looking at the chemical components of teeth and using that to estimate what dietary factors were involved in that particular population. Anyway, it's fun stuff. That was just beginning when I was, as a researcher.
Well, I didn't know that about Eugenie. You did that sort of research, and when you were speaking, and I'm sure you found it here today fascinating to think that you can judge so much of a population just by examining their teeth, how much they're worn down, or their diet, and the size of their jaws and things like that.
Yep. I was a real scientist at one point. I didn't just play one on television.
And here we are, Jeannie, in 2024, 20 years after we met in this very building.
That's right.
I was giving a talk in this very building downstairs, I think, about skepticism 20 years ago when I first met you. You were working for the National Centre for Science Education then. What's the current state of play after all these years? I mean, in Australia, the fight against the creationists is hardly noteworthy anymore. What's happening here?
Well, NCSE did expand into climate change as well as evolution because the parallels were very clear. Teachers were getting hammered for teaching evolution. Teachers started getting hammered for teaching climate change. And one of the things that the National Center for Science Education does is help teachers cope with those kinds of non-scientific challenges, as it were. And the organization continues doing that under my successor, and now the brand new director that has just taken position within the last month. But no, the climate change and evolution issues are still live and well. We actually had a very interesting talk in the Bay Area Skeptics Skep Talk, if you managed to catch that last Thursday. Glenn Branch, who was my former colleague at NCSE, the current and longtime deputy director, he brought us up to date on what's been going on with climate science or climate change education. And it's very interesting to hear him talk about how, whereas previously the climate change deniers focused on kind of, 2 or maybe 3 positions, it's not happening. Even if it's happening, it's not our fault. And even if it's happening, and it's not, and it is our fault, we can't do anything about it. I mean, those were sort of the three arguments that we were dealing with when I was director of NCSE. But nowadays, the environment has shifted slightly, and it's actually more pernicious in a way. The first argument that it's not happening, that's really hard to argue. I mean, everybody, even climate change deniers, kind of have to admit that, yeah, the planet's getting warmer. There's just so much evidence. The anthropogenicity, I think that's a real word.
That's a good word.
Whether it's our fault, I mean, whether it's human caused, that is also getting harder to deny because, again, there's just so many more markers of the human fingerprint, as it were, on climate change. You know, they still are pushing the idea that, well, we can't do anything about it anyway. I mean, after all, you know, we can't do anything because China and India are generating so much stuff, so why should we change our way of life, et cetera? But the pernicious component of this, and the thing that they really seem to be pushing these days, is attacking climate scientists. Not so much just attacking the science of climate change, but getting personal. Some of you might have seen an article that came out in the Times, and probably the Post and other newspapers might have covered it in the last week or so, that the climate scientist Michael Mann, he of the hockey stick, famous hockey stick diagram from the 90s, has won his lawsuit against of defamation. There were a couple of reporters who had attacked him in a particularly vicious way, and he sued. And you know, American libel law is better than something like that in Great Britain, but it's still hard, especially when you're a public figure, to get a judgment in your favor. But he managed to, so this was pretty great. I don't think he's going to, you know, the punitive damages were something like $1 million. I think it's highly unlikely he'll ever see any of that money or much of it, because generally appeals courts tend to look with great disfavor on very high punitive damage decisions. And Penny's nodding. She's a former practicing prosecutor. She knows. But hey, it was great. They gave Mike $1 from each of the defendants, and then $1 million in punitive damages, which of course encouraged Glenn Brantz to point out to Mike that he knew a worthy nonprofit. And in fact, Mike Mann is actually on the board of directors of NCSE, which is pretty great.
And it's good to see that the organization is still going, Jeannie.
Indeed. And you know, I always used to joke, and Glenn brought this up when in the discussion period, that I would tell my staff that as a nonprofit, our goal is to work ourselves out of a business. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to solve the problem that we are formed to solve. And when you're dealing with evolution, when you're dealing with climate change, it's probably the closest thing to a sinecure you could possibly get, unfortunately. But that is the goal.
Well, Jeannie, it's great to see you again. We've been good friends now for 20 years.
Well, not good friends. Yes.
How about that? She does one-liners too. Would you like to thank Dr. Eugenie Scott, everybody? Once again to jump back into the Trove archives, the online and other archives, as in the State Library of New South Wales or the National Library of Australia, archives of newspapers, searchable newspapers, which are so important when doing research and just important for history. Now, last week, you remember we were looking at the clairvoyant, the medium from the UK, Doris Stokes. So I thought this week, next week, and possibly the week after, we would look at references to other mediums, other psychics, other clairvoyants that have popped up in Australian newspapers over the decades. let's go back in time to the year 1985 on the 12th of September in the pages of the Sydney Morning Herald. A clairvoyant shows her hand. A story by Sarah Henry. With a little cartoon with a couple of women gazing into a crystal ball, one being the psychic, one being the client. And it says, fee on the wall, it says fees, 1 hour, and it's not clear how much, 2 hours, not clear how much. And the clairvoyant says, I see much money changing hands. Do you want to know where your career is heading? When your next love affair is going to be, or how your past will influence your future? Apparently you do. Tarot card reading, once dismissed as a pastime for the fringe element, is now in big demand. For the uninitiated, tarot card reading is a form of fortune-telling. The tarot is a pack of 78 cards, each with a symbolic picture and title, believed to contain the complete story of mankind, past, present, and future. To have a professional reading by someone believed to have psychic powers costs between $20 and $40 and lasts between 1 and 2 hours. I'll break in here to say how times have changed. It's a lot more expensive now, although comparatively, given that this was almost 40 years ago, maybe the prices are much the same. We read on. Most people tape record their readings for future reference and to play back to friends. The eastern suburbs is home to one of Sydney's best-known readers, Madame Hildegard. Madame Hildegard of the Shangri-La Psychics Research Centre does not look like a witch, a gypsy, or a tramp. She is a large, homely woman with soft, wispy hair, a thick European accent, and a healthy laugh. Madame Hildegard, 55, has been reading tarot cards in King's Cross for 20 years, but started long before she came to Australia. When I was 18, I read palms on cards in Vietnamese coffee houses, she said. It kind of came naturally to me. My grandmother was a reader. Her background is distinctly international. Her grandmother was French, her parents Swiss, and she was born in Germany. Her grandfather, 3 times removed, was Chinese. She takes off her big round glasses and shows me her Mongolic eyes for proof. She said that she grew up in a very rare atmosphere. Her uncle could remove illnesses using mind power, and she learnt to read French tarot cards from her grandmother. The origin of the tarot is surrounded by mystery. Some theories claim the cards were concocted in the late 14th century by Jacqueline Gringoneur, I hope that's pronounced, astrologer and artist, to amuse King Charles VI of France. Other schools of thought say that the pack was invented in prehistoric times, when they were used as a calendar noting nature's cycles. The most popular notion is that the cards were the remains of the Book of Thoth, burnt during a fire in an Egyptian temple. Thoth was the Egyptian god of wisdom. Occult knowledge and the invention of numbers and sacred writings were also attributed to him. Madame Hildegard reads Egyptian cards, but this is but one string to her bow. Her business card lists other specialities, including massage, acupuncture, psychometry of flowers, and pyramid power. I have a Bachelor of Acupuncture, a Master of Hypnosis, I am an osteopath, I've done basic science, and of course, I am a freelance clairvoyant, she said. The reasons why people want to have their cards read vary. It may be for fun, curiosity, or there may be a stronger underlying purpose. Madame Hildegard has her own ideas. Most people don't know why they come to me particularly, but often it is because they know I am a very good counselor. I don't just read the cards, I counsel people. Look at their lives, look at grief and pain they carry, and tell them how to get rid of it. Madame Hildegard admits that she has always been clairvoyant, even as a child. She cites examples. When I got married, I knew it would end. It was horrendous to know that on my wedding day, and 15 years later, it did. Madame Hildegard's room certainly looks the part, with a pyramid in one corner and rows of books on the occult and alternative health lining one wall. An important point for potential seekers is whether the reader is a genuine practitioner or a fraud. Madame Hildegard agreed this was a problem. She said people had told her that they had lost hundreds of dollars to shonky readers. Shonky being an Australian term meaning fake or fraud. She shook her head and smiled a whimsical smile. Unfortunately, you get charlatans in every profession. And we would give her the benefit of the doubt and suggest that she probably genuinely believed that she had all these mystical, wonderful powers and abilities. So she too would be thinking that others were the fakes. Now let's see again in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 16th of June 1988. Cross Clairvoyant sees a fight for freedom ahead, by Catherine Lumby. And the accompanying photograph here is captioned Ursula Lennon. The cross is a special kind of community, it says. Picture by Barry Chapman, and it is of the subject of the story, Ursula, who is decked out in, as far as we can see, being a black and white picture, sort of like gypsy paraphernalia, a headdress with a crystal ball and tarot cards. 5 nights a week, Ursula Lennon dons her psychedelic silk gown, sequined shawl and gypsy headdress and takes her crystal ball to the streets of the Cross, and the Cross being King's Cross, an area just to the south of the city, the central city of Sydney. According to Lennon, she is a street entertainer and a highly reputable tourist attraction. According to the City of Sydney Council, she is simply in breach of Bylaw 1065 and thus liable to be arrested, moved on, and have her equipment confiscated. A police and council blitz, aimed in part at eradicating buskers, has made Lennon actually aware of her vulnerability. She has begun a public campaign to get official recognition for professional street entertainers in the Cross. Last week, Lennon looked up to see 4 council officers standing over her table with batons hanging from their belts. They told me if I came back the following night, they'd arrest me and impound all my possessions. I told them I'd be back. I've been trying to get a license for 2 years now. I want to be recognized, and I'm prepared to stand up for my rights to earn a living. Once an executive in the Department of Industrial Relations, Lennon was forced to retire because she says of RSI, repetitive strain injury. At 49, she felt too young to retire on a pension. Lennon, who had previously done a little freelance predicting on London's Portobello Road, recalls her decision to become a full-time fortune-teller. One night walking through the Cross, I saw a palmist dressed rather shabbily and sitting on a milk crate, and it came to me. I decided to become a tourist attraction. In a little more than 2 years, she has become one of Australia's best-known clairvoyants, drawing clients from all over Australia. International reputation has followed interviews with the foreign media, including items in Time Life and Playboy. The television cameras get me to rise the crystal ball and give them a bit of razzmatazz, darling, she says. I let them know there's more to Australians than bush hats and corks. The president of the King's Cross Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Mike Connors, says he is 100% behind the clairvoyants and other established entertainers. While he draws the line at amplified music, he says the Chamber would like to see the licensing of a consolidated group of professional street entertainers. Although the council can grant permission to people to collect money in a public place, anyone doing so may still be in breach of other regulations. In addition, the police can book buskers for obstructing pedestrian traffic. Lennon believes the strict enforcement of these regulations in the Cross is archaic. The whole reason the crowds are drawn here is to see unusual and flamboyant characters. They come to the Cross to be shocked. I have people coming to my table every night saying, "We shouldn't be here. What a dreadful place." They say it with terror and delight. Lennon is familiar with the casualties of Cross life. And I'll break in here to say that unfortunately that area, even way back in 1988, had a reputation for drug overdoses and, shall we say, the seamier side of life. Parents often bring photographs of their missing children to her so she can watch out for them. She also keeps in touch with the Salvation Army, whose members patrol the streets at night and hand out literature to people in need of accommodation or counselling. I'm very conscious of the number of people who need help. I deal with suicidal people, alcoholics and drug addicts. The Cross is a special kind of community, she says. We help each other. Even the police are marvellous. However, the recent street offensive has only made Lennon more determined to argue her case. I love sitting out on the street and meeting the people. I hated the thought of retiring, and, as it is, my present job is much better than any office job could ever be. So there we are. That's a very different spin, a different angle on clairvoyance and psychics. Now, from 1988, we go back in time a little bit to 1979. On the 18th of March in the Sydney Morning Herald, clairvoyant Rosemary lists some big names. Your jaw would drop in amazement if you knew some of the clients who visit Sydney clairvoyant Rosemary Marriott, and a story by Barbara Marvich. Among them are state and federal politicians, business empire directors, television, radio and newspaper stars, and Double Bay jet setters. Double Bay being a particularly affluent suburb here in Sydney on the harbour. Most of their names can't be revealed, but they include Ainsley Gotto, Sir John Gorton's private secretary when he was Prime Minister, who visits Miss Marriott every time she's in Australia. Mike Willesee, who was a media character, media commentator, yachting magnate Sid Fisher, and Sue Punch, wife of the deputy leader of the opposition, Leon Punch. Miss Marriott says she has done readings for Junie Morosi, who was a character involved in the political discourse of Australia in the 1970s, Bob Hawke, former Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, former Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, former Prime Minister, Princess Margaret, Lady Sonia McMahon, David Frost, and the entire cast of the old television program Number 96. Now I'll break in here and say that last paragraph is interesting, where it says Miss Marriott says she has done readings for, and it lists all those very famous people. Does that mean they came to her? Does that mean she just sat down one day and decided to write something about them? The impression is that they went to her, which I can't see Bob Hawke, Gough Whitlam or Malcolm Fraser doing. I don't think that would have happened, nevertheless. And she told the fortune for thousands of men and women when she toured shopping centres throughout New South Wales recently. Rosemary Marriott is probably Australia's best-known clairvoyant. She not only claims to read the future, but says she has visions of future events. Several months before the Granville train disaster, she predicted it on a television show and in a newspaper. She gave the location and date of the accident accurately. Well, there, breaking in, as I do all the time, there is a testable claim. It's all very well to just write this in a report, and the Granville train disaster was in the later part of the 1970s. It was a bridge falling on a train here in Sydney, and many people were killed. Very tragic. But to claim in this article that this so-called psychic
predicted it on a television show and in a newspaper. Well, I would love to see that television show and newspaper. And I wonder if she really did give the location and the date of the accident accurately. It's very easy to write these things without any evidence. 2 years ago, she says she predicted that a scientist would invent a machine that could detect retardation in children before they were born. She gave a doctor's name and said the machine would be called something like Octopus. The Octoson is now in use in major Sydney hospitals. And she claims to have made countless other accurate predictions of accidents, deaths, stock market movements, and scientific discoveries. "I've got a waiting list 2 years long," said Miss Marriott, who was taught to read palms by gypsies when she was 9. Why were people so fascinated by the occult sciences? "People are dissatisfied with today's materialistic philosophy," she said. "They have a new spirit of inquiry. They want to search for something more, want to know more about themselves. Clairvoyance offers people hope, one of the best medicines. People come to me on the brink of despair, and I can usually see something positive in their future for them to look forward to. I can give them self-interest and motivation again." Miss Marriott believes palmistry can play an important role in medicine. "The hand is a warning system. It's the barometer of the body and shows all the diseases and sicknesses a person has had and will suffer," she said. She claimed that 6 Sydney doctors referred some of their patients to her for an opinion about their problems, and she could often pinpoint the cause of a patient's emotional and physical problems and suggest ways to overcome them. "I also visit the Spastic Centre regularly and do readings for spastic children to determine their capabilities and the sort of work or hobby that would suit them," she said. Red flag much? What a crazy story this is. When was this? 1979, okay. Children she had helped included mongoloids, cretins, slow learners, emotionally disturbed children, and even young unemployed people. Bearing in mind this is how the story was written at the time, using the terms that we wouldn't use today. Rosemary Marriott worked for more than 20 years in Sydney as a singer, dancer, actress in the days of the Tivoli and the Theatre Royal. She was also a teacher of English and music for much of that time in many state and private schools, and played the harp with the Sydney Youth Symphony Orchestra. Well, I wonder whatever happened to Rosemary Marriott, because she's made some pretty fantastic, far-fetched, and frankly unbelievable claims, or they've been made about her in this report. Why don't we have a quick look? I have found another account or another reference to Rosemary Marriott in 1986 in a story which I'll probably cover maybe even next week, called Psychic Boom. There are long queues for the secrets of good health, mortality, destiny, and previous lives, where it says, lists a group of so-called psychics. Rosemary Marriott, palmist, is virtually booked up for 2 years, and there is a long waiting list for cancellations. And the other reference I have found comes from 1978. The big news of 1979, what the seers foretell. So it's a prediction thing, which I might get to again, which mentions her. And the only other mention that's coming up at the moment is, I believe it's her obituary. Rosemary Marriott, 1938 to 1994. The founder of the internationally acclaimed Merry Makers dance troupe, made up of intellectually and physically handicapped people, Rosemary "Rosie" Marriott has died after a long battle with cancer. She was 55. And this does sound like the same person, Miss Marriott was awarded an AM, which is an Australian honour, in 1992 for her service to the disabled, and was a celebrated musician, singer,
and entertainer. She played harp, xylophone and percussion with the Australian Youth Symphony and harp with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. It goes on to a little bit about the dance troupe, and what's interesting is not one word about her psychic claims. That's interesting. An interesting Trove segment this week, an interesting look into the archives, the newspaper archives, featuring various people who all claimed to have special mystical, magical powers. Lots of different angles this week, I think. We'll be continuing with more psychics, clairvoyants, and mystics in next week's episode. And just a note from me, while I've been doing lots of research in the online archives, the troves, the places where we can find out about our history in print, I discovered a wonderful photograph of my grandfather and father together. Unbelievable. And I looked at this, I sent it to my siblings, and then I thought, I wish my parents were still here. They would love to see this. They probably didn't know it existed at all. And I also found a paragraph announcing or relating to the marriage of my parents. Because, as I've discovered, when you go to Trove or any online archive, you never know what you might find.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week, and thank you, as always, to my wonderful subscribers and supporters who send in donations and subscriptions to keep the Skeptic Zone going. And a big thank you to one of my main supporters who wishes to remain safely anonymous. You know who you are, but thank you very much indeed. And indeed, as Susan Gerbic now is chuckling as she hears this, I have bought yet another new microphone, which is going to be delivered soon. Next week, the show will be coming to you from Skeptoid headquarters in Bend, Oregon, where I will be catching up with my old friend Brian Dunning, and he tells me that the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See has passed 600,000 views on YouTube, which is really great, and it's now available in the US anyway on Prime, on the Prime network, the streaming network. And I see he's just picked up yet another award for Best Documentary from a Canadian film festival. Well done, Brian. So next week on the show, I might be catching up with Brian with some more behind-the-scenes news about that documentary, and the Trove segment we will continue our look into mediums and psychics. But for this week, from rainy and slightly cold and windy Oakland, California, this is Richard Saunders signing off.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.